Well, Kyle?
Yes, Garrett?
Ether Marble. Well, it happened again. We really enjoyed a dungeon and wanted to just talk about a single dungeon.
The deep dive on Mount Gulg.
Can you deep dive into something that is the highest point on the first?
It's a volcano. It's a volcano because, well, Bankert said it once, but also Mount Gulg across the Final Fantasy games is a volcano.
I was about to
say, original Final Fantasy.
It's only because they told us, because they didn't show us. There's no lava, no magma to be seen. Yep. I don't even recall seeing smoke anywhere when it was still, a terrestrial mountain as opposed to
dormant
flying. Yes, I know they can be dormant. I know, but why you gonna mention volcano and then there's not gonna be any magma? Like, how cool would that have been? We're taking a volcano and we're flying up into the sky. Why isn't magma just falling out of the bottom of this thing?
That would be cool, but that's not what we're here to talk about today.
We're here to talk about the dungeon because it's great. But before we get into the nitty gritty of this big and rocky dungeon,
that was nice.
We want to let you know about everything else we've got going on at Grinding Gear. We know that you're subbed to this channel. You must be.
You are subbed, right?
But did you know that we have 2 other channels and a podcast?
I like the Clips channel because you get to see the goods from the stream without all that stream business.
It is a very good stream, though. We would recommend that you watch our streams.
Please watch our streams.
And of course, we got the Grinding Gear podcast, which you can get wherever it is that you get your podcasts. You prefer Apple, you prefer Google, you prefer Spotify, and you can get even more extra content on our Patreon by visiting supportourbromance.com.
Supportourbromance.com. It's a great set piece, and this is a wonderful illusion to construct for your intensely linear dungeon. And if you haven't heard us talk about that, go enjoy our Holminster Switch deep dive. That's a great video too. Final Fantasy has done away with the exploration dungeons with its more recent patches. And I think this is such a beautiful example of how you can hide the seams on that. Of course, at any point during this dungeon, you can open the map and see, oh yes, one path. But the exploration, along with the way it divides up the segments, allows you to feel like you're making progress in something adventurous. And in fact, in this case, the land doesn't move at all. There's some hand movement in the background, but that is all strictly like skybox business.
Well, there's times where hands like slam down right in front of you and they're like enemies spawn. It's pretty darn interactive for an MMO, where there's limitations of the engine and you kind of understand like what is possible in a dungeon. They put a lot of effort into this. I love the sense of scale in the beginning here and looking down and seeing the arm move around and stuff like that.
Well, and they toe a line in Final Fantasy XIV that I feel like is very, very important. And it's something that World of Warcraft has kind of lost its way with, which is just voiceovers. Like, this is part of your main story quest.
I am righteousness, and righteousness will prevail.
The adventure is taking place. And in an MMO, you're going to farm things. You're going to do things multiple times thanks to roulettes and stuff. So you can't quite have the level of interaction that you would have in a traditional RPG because, as your side characters yell at you to go faster, that we need to hurry, that we have to make it to the end because the big bad guy's going to do their thing, you're only playing through that once. It doesn't have to be replayable. So here, across this entire dungeon, you have Vothri panicking, yelling at you.
So it is you. You will not defile my new paradise.
But it's not spurring you on. It's more just making you excited to kick his butt, which is great. It's not going to be tiring. Like if, for instance, Thancred or Orianger was always in your ear telling you what to do. Look out from the side. Oh my God, Sin Eaters from above.
We didn't get super deep into Dragonflight. I maxed and then kind of wandered off, but there was a dungeon in there where we heard the same line like double-digit times in a few minutes. It was super annoying.
Oh, we got another group coming in. I'm going to back up because there's only 4 of us. We no longer have the over-level help. Do not want to pull that next group.
Well done. Keep retaking the weapons.
We did it.
2 more remain.
Let fly, Blackbird fly. I was playing freaking Kingdom Rush. There's comparisons that, of course, come from a place of anger and competition. That's not really what I'm talking about. We are approaching 2019, 2020 here. Like, we are not that far in the past now that we're in Shadowbringers. So those comparisons to modern dungeon design can start to be a bit more heavy as we look at the two games and see what they're up to, and hopefully their MMO arms race making each other better.
I also like just the cornucopia of Sin Eaters they're just throwing at you. I mean, we've fought a lot of Sin Eaters at this point. There's a lot of them even in Holminster Switch, but there's a kind of a narrative difference between the two, because in Holminster Switch, they're like freshly born. We're seeing a lot of them come fresh out of the egg sacs, right? Here, they are there. They are a line of defense. They're ready to throw down. They've already gathered around their Light Warden to protect him.
And there's a great evolution on that as we go deeper into dungeon. They add in some new elements to excite up those Sin Eaters again. We get to see, for instance, on the Parish Path that begins our zone, the Forgiven Jealousy and the really, really cool looking Forgiven Hypocrisy. It's called a Black Vanguard, but the armored looking Sin Eaters over our sexy angel types. And there's even that army feel that the commander is in range. Forgiven Obscenity keeps showing up to do random ground blasts, entirely uninteractable, but still adding to the storyline.
This is something that reminds me so much of theme park ride design. Something you see in dark rides a lot, where there's something that's kind of harassing you the whole time, and at the very end you finally get to see a big version of it. There's that dinosaur ride, or actually, I guess they're both dinosaurs. There's also the T-Rex and the Jurassic Park ride in Orlando. They both kind of harass you along the way, and then at the end, you get your big, run-in with it.
Yeah, if you haven't seen the video of the Jurassic World ride in China, that thing is amazing.
I have not.
They took Countdown to Extinction, at what was dinosaur, or is dinosaur now, and really ran with the idea.
I love this kind of stuff. There's a lot about MMOs that remind me of theme parks, and this is just another one of those moments where I felt like I was like, oh, it's like dark ride design. That's cute. And then we get to our first boss. We get to finally fight the lion. Unless you've done Amdapor.
And this is where the support duties come in. There's a bit of information in this dungeon to glean from the sidelines. Of course, not required, because it's an optional feature to use the trust system to have the other Scions quest with you. But they do have several nuggets along the way. And in this case, highly recommend, if you're going to do it in the first place, run with Thancred and Reen. They have a great sort of completion of their story if you make your way into this dungeon with those two characters. And in particular, Thancred says, this fellow again? Just like old times. And Reen joins in with but this time I'll fight too.
Oh.
Referencing the cinematic that they battled the lion in.
I was about to say, is that a reference to the cinematic?
Yeah, so cinematic's canon. It's not some, fan shot thing. It's got actual lines, and actually, now thinking back on it, there is a note to time travel in it as well.
There is?
Yeah, the Crystal Exarch says,
"If history must be unwritten, let it be unwritten."
Battle.
At the time, nothing in my brain said time travel about that. But yes, knowing what we know now, that certainly seems.
That's the coyness of the situation, right? Yeah. Is that the cinematic matters more as you go deeper into the game. That you gleam from it. It wasn't spoilers, but you can now look back on it and say, oh, wow, look at that. Like, that actually happened. Like, Thancred, Reen, Minfilia making their way through the bottom of Yulmore. That was not some side story or cinematic universe thing.
It wasn't the bard just telling embellishing the tale of Thancred and now Reen, but that's cool. That's good to know.
It actually happened. And in fact, if you bring Alphino along for the ride, they even reference one of the guardians of Amdapor here. Now, did you need that help? Not necessarily. It's a one-to-one model, but Alphino's character throughout this does continue to make note about how he'd be interested in researching Amdapor further. Now, Alphino might be a little disappointed because there's actually very few similarities between Forgiving Cruelty, Vothry's Light Warden Lion, and the Winged Lion that you fight in Lost City of Amdapor.
Behind the scenes, we were trying to remember what the hell the thing was called, and then we go look up Lost City of Amdapor, and it's literally just called Winged Lion. Might as well be named. Lion. It might as well be named Thing It Is.
It does have wind orbs, But otherwise, it's more kind of crawling around and slashing. This thing is definitely doing more Sin Eater things. In fact, a lot of these abilities have evolved directly from our well dungeon we did, where we fought biblically accurate storage.
Final Sin Eater we fight too has those kind of like avoid on the diagonal attacks. Like it seems to just be a theme with the Sin Eaters. The only real similarity other than the models are basically identical between Winged Lion and Lost City and our Forgiven Cruelty here is that they both have a flying phase, like sort of where they go up in the air. But Forgiven Cruelty, it's much more offensive because you go all the way back to Lost City. It just kind of flies up and like spawns an orb you need to kill. Here, dudes are like trying to nuke you with the, get to your safety corners attack.
Well, it's a little tricky too because it ends up working in more and more AoEs as you go. So it escalates. As long as you did the well with any recent frequency, you're going to be aware of the triangle-like charges and getting out of the way of those. But the boss itself explodes underneath, and they put additional ether currents out to the sides.
Ether currents.
I'm also just a huge nut about what is Lumen Infinitum. I love delay lasers. I love big arcs across the ground, back from Evangelion, going all the way to, just about anything that does it, like Mass Effect, the Reaper lasers. This whole laser leaves an explosion.
StarCraft 2, the Colossus.
Yeah,
which
StarCraft 2.
I guess is really just kind of playing off of War of the Worlds. Yeah, I'm with you on that. We look at us agreeing on aesthetics.
Upon defeating, there is a line from Reen saying, "We did it, Thancred!" And Thancred throws in an eye. Nice to finally settle an old score. After the events of the trolley business, there was great emotional moments where Thancred invited Reen to the Scion family. Maybe not officially, but, to the family in his own heart. If you do the trust duty here, there's a nice kind of pal around that happens, which does make me slightly concerned for the future, as now there's something to be taken away, but it's a great conclusion to that story.
Oh, and before we get to the next, kind of zone shakeup, go through the load wall, the first load wall, we get to see an old friend, Kyle.
The Demon Wall!
I know him! I know him!
Used as a divider. Best divider there could be. We've seen spiderwebs, we've seen mold piles, we've seen walls that get destroyed so people don't pull too much. Demon Wall, top tier usage. In fact, Forgiven Apathy is the name of the Demon Wall here.
It don't care, it's a wall.
We discussed this in our Holminster Switch video. These are the monster names as found in the Crystarium's monster manual. You can make assumptions about how they were created, but since we've gotten away from animals, the majority of these probably people. There's certainly beasts in here. We get to see a new Sphinx model as well, directly taken from our Alleg kind of set.
Creepy looking.
Yeah, it's a great one too. The lack of emotion or feeling that the Demon Wall has been forgiven for, not really something you should terribly concern yourself with. Interestingly enough, the marble was actually too white when they originally released the game, and this was a bigger problem with the Demon Wall than other places, but overall it was just an issue because our circles on the ground here are, for the most part, kind of a goldish. And we have gold, woven into the white marble here on quite a few of the battlefields. But it was so bright and so cranked, people couldn't see the ground effects. So by the time of 5.08, not a full, big patch, but one of the minor patches, they turned it down to more of a gray white rather than this luminous white they had originally.
It's already so bright. This is something I've noticed. In Final Fantasy XIV a lot. Is that when they go bright, they go like pure white, and I've really noticed it making the last thumbnail. the behind the Exarch was just pure white, and I was trying to pop them out so I could kind of darken the background and kind of brighten up the Exarch, and I had nowhere to go. That's right. It's time to open Photoshop again. Here's last week's thumbnail. Always save your work, kids, because then you can go back in and make more content from the content you already made. Here's the original screenshot that I used for the thumbnail last week. Here I did a little copy pasting because when you turn all this on, it extends the sky over here. But you don't see that the Exarch's been copy and pasted behind my giant head. But looking at it, it's it's so blown out, and this is what I'm talking about with when Final Fantasy XIV uses white. They go pure freaking white for the background, and so I can take this and I can try and do some quick adjustments, like messing with contrast to try and find. So if I really drive the contrast down here, look here at this cloud. If I drive it down, I'm starting to find more visual information from these clouds. But if you look here in the bright spots, there's no information. This is real quick and dirty. I can just keep bringing the contrast down and down. There's nothing there. It's so overexposed. There's just no information to rediscover in these clouds. And so when I was making this thumbnail, as I undo all this, as I was making this thumbnail, let's zoom out here. You can kind of see my approach. Here's my first pass at just trying to up the contrast a little bit, get a little more color value and contrast into the Exarch. And then I made the Exarch bigger for the purposes of the thumbnail. But this was kind of what I had before. And I just, what I always do when I'm making thumbnails, I make them real small because I want to make sure if one of y'all see it on your phone, you still know what's going on. And I was pretty happy with this. You can see I went in. I'm going to zoom in here. And I added an outline, the patented white YouTube outline to the Exarch. And I was like, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So I was like, the Exarch just needs a little more of a pop. And I was just fighting. With this white background because there's just nothing there. And so I just got lazy. I just did a little. I literally made a blue circle like this, except it was filled and not outlined. And I hit it with a little Gaussian blur filter. And that helped sell the rest of the outline on the Exarch because I cut them out. And to me, this just made it pop, and I was able to darken the background. And this is what I'm talking about. This is what I have to do. Because when Final Fantasy goes white, they go pure frickin' white.
Which is interesting because what I was taught in the minor art lessons I've had, don't use pure white. Because nothing really is. Like, nothing is creepier than if you paint a person with completely white eyeballs.
Or, God forbid, individually pure white teeth.
Yes, yeah. It's really distressing. Like, there's a lot of yellow in our eyes. There's a lot of color reflection happening in the area around. But it does give it that otherworldly quality that's not reflecting the sky. And these are kind of spawning in almost like they're being loaded, like programmed. It's very bit space or Netrunner kind of look to it.
It feels wholly alien, which is interesting because it's like Roman columns. I've seen Roman columns before. It's nothing but it seems so out of place after, again, having spent so much time in kind of the barren wasteland that is Calusia, and just like being surrounded by brown rock, and then suddenly you have these pristine white slabs of marble and columns and eventually statues just spawning in.
Speaking of the statues, they're wonderful.
Yeah, you made a comment during the stream that you're like, oh, thank God they're not just reused models.
It's a pet peeve. I totally understand. For production scheduling, for the needs of a sane team, sometimes you gotta take your variant model, paint it all white, and just put it out there. I massively appreciate, though, anytime I see brand new models. I think Final Fantasy has been very, very good with its reused and reskinned models. And when it comes to statues, uniquely posed, with unique fabric hanging off them like we find around Forgiven Whimsy, it just does a lot for me. It really helps me feel like I'm exploring something new.
To me, it's just impressive, like any times where you can't place where something came from. And I'm with you. I think 14 has so many unique assets. It's impressive. It goes that little extra mile. And there's multiples here because the first thing we come across are like those giant statues of like the hooded figures. And then we get to the point where I was like, oh, what in the fresh Elden Ring is this? Which is like all the little people kind of piled on top of each other.
This would have been before Elden Ring, so it's very Anor Londo Lothric. Like, Dark Souls has definitely explored Gothic castles. The particular melted worshiper statues really, really get my juices going. That is a oppressive imagery that I just love.
It kind of belies the clean, pristine nature of everything else too, even though it is itself made from the same material. But yeah, everything going on with the marble's great.
And it's purity. You got this pure marble look, and then you put sexy ladies in there, and your brain goes, well, those don't line up. And it's no different to me than like taking the camera and tilting it slightly. Your brain just kind of goes, something's wrong in here. The subtext starts flowing.
The whole thing is just, I mean, Vothru from the get-go is just this kind of hypocrite, this hypocrisy. You know, he is inherently corrupt, but there's all these allusions to purity and cleansing people of sin and all that stuff, but they're clearly monsters. And then we move on to the White Gate, and I had such a great little moment here, because you go through your load wall thingy, and then you come out onto a cliffside, and we're kind of above the golden rings of Mount Gulg, and I had an instant of disappointment. I was like, no, it's more of the same rock texture I've been staring at in all of Calusia. And then I turned to my left, and I see all the wonderful, yes, I read your comments, apparently etheric marble just being morphed into existence. Someone, I don't know if this probably is, makes sense to me, is saying it's the same thing as Emmett just, magically creating clothes for Y'shtola. Those are ether clothes.
Oh, so she's naked if he ever dies?
I mean,
the big thrilling conclusion to Shadowbringers.
We were still standing on white marble when Vothru died, so I think it's just made manifest, and then it exists. It exists.
It would be funny though. So you put down Emmett, and then camera pans behind you to all the signs. Y'shtola just stand there.
Maybe she gets another costume change before we kill Emmett, which I'm pretty sure isn't happening this expansion.
Well, speaking of which, Oriange supplies the little throwaway line here on that lore, saying all this via ethereal manipulation. Impressive. So there you go. Ethereal manipulation. Is that word?
Well, there you go. Yeah, we're recording this on the day when our last video went up, so I was reading through comments. Multiple people mentioned, the marble's just made of ether. So Oriange confirms it.
So my preferred trust group for this is Reen, Thancred, Oriange.
How many times did you run this?
Enough. It makes a great arc. And to that note, Alizé, not a lot to say. Along for the ride here. Kick some butt, but nothing really to glean from Alizé in this adventure.
But then we get to our second boss, Forgiven Whimsy. I promise I don't feel this way to ruffle feathers, but I am smitten by this boss. I absolutely love this boss design.
It is an awesome idea. It is highly complicated. It could have been a screen, a color, a vestment that it wears with a tic-tac-toe grid on it. But they went for it with the full rotating Rubik's Cube, and it's puzzling of itself out.
Yeah, with a little bit of Simon Says.
A little bit of Simon Says in there, and again, escalating that at the halfway point of the fight by adding the exploding orbs, the shiny orbs. Actually, their technical term, if you will. The spawning donut AoEs on the ground.
That's kind of the maximum level of complication that this fight gets, is when those orbs start coming out, because it comes out simultaneously with the Rubik's Cube effect, which I believe is exegesis. But it's when the boss Rubik's Cubes itself, and whatever parts of the grid have faces, so you can actually kind of tell where it's going to be safe before they glow. But they'll also glow to really drill it home that those are the squares that are going to explode. Early in the fight, you only have to deal with like one of these at a time. But later in the fight, exegesis and shiny orbs happen simultaneously. So you really got to be on your stuff to find the little sliver of safe area. It's diabolical. I love it.
And all these names are very biblical in that way. We're definitely in that storage kind of mindset here with our forgiven whimsy. So whimsical, it had to be forgiven. We have Judgment Day, as you mentioned, the exegesis, which is like analysis of text. We have catechism, the tank buster.
Catechism.
Catechism, yeah, like Christian denomination principles in like a question answer call back form. So they're really riding this idea, a sort of angelic theme with this boss.
Yeah, they don't do it a ton. I mean, the catechism is just a tank buster. There's no question other than, does this hurt? And the answer is yes. But yeah, they're definitely riding that theme.
As you put it down, Oriange says, by my reckoning, it was an elemental maid eater.
That's a can of worms.
We literally fight what looks like a can of worms in a bit, which is probably another elemental to play into this.
No, that's when you don't add butter to your spaghetti and it sits in a colander for more than 30 seconds. And we get to the final section of this dungeon, Winding Flare, where the etheric marble just completely takes over. We get our fully formed palace gardens, basically. But they're monumental, just massive space that we end up fighting through here.
Interesting story told through some buffs here is that we are once again under attack by Forgiven Venri, who is wielding a very interesting looking pickaxe type weapon that I'd be curious to know more about. But also all the Sin Eaters you fight in this Winding Flare zone are under a buff from Vothri directly. So they're actually more powerful, sort of empowered by Vothri's panic in the background.
I love the archway in the distance here. Like the whole time you see it as you just get closer and closer to it.
Y'shtola reveals that our final boss here, the Forgiven Obscenity, might also be of the status of Warden, though we don't eat its light.
No, so I feel like why is that line in there? That seems to debunk it immediately.
Yeah, maybe just empowered to such a degree, but not necessarily environmentally responsible for the light outside.
Yeah. This is another very fun fight. All the Sin Eater / Warden fights have very satisfying dances to pull off. And this is no exception.
Yeah, this is a wonderful learn as you go fight. All the boss abilities are named around musical terminologies, mainly directions as to whether or not you're going to increase your volume or have a strong or sudden accent to the musical instrument you're playing. I think the most creative part of this fight is the ringed explosion around her that you can start to put together and dodge the outside rings. And then when they split into multiple copies using Feather Marionette, you look for which one has the multi-halos on it, and it'll still do the multi-stage explosions from that direction.
This is very fun to piece together in the moment, like very first time learning it. Made me feel clever. I really like the, I want to call it like the shield lasers, but you know, the golden discs that spawn kind of in a phalanx formation, which also makes me think of shields.
The solitaire ring.
I like how ever since I started playing this game, and specifically when I was learning how to tank, where I was having to avoid more things, all the way back to the early days of Realm Reborn, when I first learned that as long as you are not standing in the attack telegraph, when the highlight disappears, you can feel free to get back in the way of it. I love anything that lets me step into, it looks like I'm stepping into attack, but I don't get punished for it. And so Solitaire Ring, it gives me that. It gives me that euphoric, gives me the good brain juices, Kyle. When the laser goes off, I'm like, it's already going off. I can step into this laser. It's not going to hurt me. I love it. It's great.
A feedback to play into, plus with positionals being so important for melees, and of course the tank, putting the boss in the right place, being able to get back into position quickly before the boss starts randomly moving about is very, very nice to do.
If anything, even it's kind of taking the form of criticism. It's like the lion was really built up, and it was the first boss of the dungeon. Is I think the least interesting of the three bosses here.
Yeah, the lion ended up being a weird sort of red herring, even in our book when we first started Shadowbringers, and of course a part of the cinematic.
Well, we know it's been around a long time, so as far as Sin Eaters are concerned, and ones of like notable form, the lion's been around
if they ever did a subvert your expectations, this would be about as far as they've gone.
Yeah, thinking back on all of the dungeons that we've done so far, like this feels like I don't know. Is there another dungeon? Doesn't matter. But this starting with Holminster Switch, this feels like a cap to me. Like that feels very much like the beginning of a journey. This feels very much like at least very close to it. Like Holminster Switch and Mount Gulg feel very much cut from the same cloth. They're very, obviously very Sin Eater heavy.
We have Sin Eater escalation. In Holminster Switch, we fought a lot of wild animals and one or two official Sin Eaters, and certainly with our Light Warden, we got a feeling of what these Sin Eaters were capable of becoming and their power. Now we've just been plowing through those angels no problem for a while, particularly with the duty we did there in Lakeland. Mount Gulg serves to not only showcase a couple of new things about the Sin Eaters, how they might be empowered by Vothru or even be empowering each other, as Ystolaline mentions with the defeating of Forgotten Obscenity, an eater that makes the others fiercer. Lovely. We got to see the full gambit of eaters possible. And so we can close the book on that chapter and move towards whatever new thing we're going to fight. And it showcases so well something that Final Fantasy has been very good at, which is allowing you to feel powerful as you go. There is no heavy reset of your power at the start of this expansion. Of course, there's the Midgard-Stormer laser cut you off from Heideling kind of business where you rebuild that throughout.
That's more narrative, though, than it's not like we powered down as a playable character from a game mechanic standpoint.
Right, we find new challenges and people who challenge us, but rarely is there a serious expansionitis that I feel when it comes to the Warrior of Light's power growth.
Well, yeah, they don't have What's the new buzzword for World of Warcraft after Preach's interview with Ian?
By design?
You excited to see what dungeons look like after this?
Absolutely. I'm curious to see how they evolve these mechanics. Clearly, we have gotten way more detailed, like with our Forgiven Whimsy, on what a boss can represent. And we've seen little mini games like we saw in our Mario Golf dungeon about like crossing balance beams or moving in very unique ways, the floor itself changing dramatically, the battlefield changing to something else with like Titania. But that is now being worked back into our dungeons. We're seeing not only the big raid content kind of have these exciting things, but also the dungeons themselves. And now that they put a cap on their Sin Eater storyline, they can apply these thoughts to other places. And I think the empowered Sin Eaters are more interesting than, say, Arboredo's mud mechanic. But it is a way to reuse similar models or the same types of models and make them a bit more deadly, if not just more interesting, as the fight progresses. So just about every dungeon in Final Fantasy, we have a distinct visual progression as we move through a zone.
That's what I'm interested to see. And I think the similarity between this and Holminster Switch and why we felt we wanted to do standalone videos on them are because I think they're both really good examples of both the kind of aesthetic experience of a dungeon and also the gameplay experience of a dungeon with the boss design. They're both strong, to say the least, in those regards.
And I think something like Vothru's buff would be a very cool way to do future content, such as something along the lines of Mythic. Now, that's its own can of worms, but I would love to see more hard dungeons again. I really love that philosophy that we saw in Stormblood, Heavensward, A Realm Reborn, and it'd be really cool to see an evolution of this, kind of a revisiting of Mount Gulg, put it back on the ground Mount Gulg, that could come in the future.
Ooh, that'd be interesting. It's still there, though. Doesn't the Talos essentially just kind of freeze up and just keeps it held there?
As far as we know at this current time, yes, the Skybox has a permanent Talos in it.
I'd be into just normal hard modes or a harder difficulty. Just find a way to get that into the mix, because you and I have so much love for the optional dungeons, and we know they're not really doing those anymore. But there's not a whole lot of a reason to go do optional dungeons because they're not part of the most popular roulette. I just want to live in dungeons.
Dungeons are good.